$50,000. That's my final offer for this failing business, my Uncle David said, spreading his arms to gesture at my empty restaurant. I'm doing you a favor, really. No one else would even make an offer in this condition. Maybe it's time to admit running a restaurant isn't suitable for you. I sat across from him at what used to be our busiest table, now covered in dust from 2 weeks of closure. The health department shutdown notice was still taped to the front door, the result of a suspiciously timed anonymous tip about food safety violations. My name is Michelle Chen, and at 35, I'd built Golden Dragon from a hole-in-the-wall takeout spot into one of the most popular Asian fusion restaurants in Seattle. At least until my uncle decided a woman had no place running the family's culinary legacy. That's generous of you, I replied calmly, watching his smug smile grow. But I'll need to review the offer with my lawyer. His smile faltered slightly. Uncle David wasn't used to me being so professional. He was used to the quiet niece who always backed down, who respected her elders without question. The one who'd learned everything about running a restaurant in his kitchen 20 years ago, while he constantly reminded me that real chefs were men. What he didn't know was that I'd learned more than just cooking from him. I'd learned to watch, to wait, and to keep records of everything. Lawyers? He scoffed, straightening his designer jacket. Michelle, be reasonable. Your restaurant is closed. Your reputation is ruined. Your staff has already started looking for other jobs. I'm offering you a clean exit. You can go back to teaching cooking classes or whatever it is women do these days. He wasn't wrong about the situation looking dire. The health department shutdown had triggered a cascade of problems. Canceled reservations, spoiled inventory, staff wondering if they should jump ship. Our Yelp rating had plummeted after a sudden flood of one-star reviews, all suspiciously similar in tone and all specifically mentioning poor management and unprofessional service. But Uncle David had made one crucial mistake in his eagerness to force me out. He'd gotten sloppy with his sabotage. I'd first noticed something was wrong 3 months ago, when suppliers started misplacing our orders. Then came the power outages during peak dinner service, equipment failures, delivery mix-ups. Small things at first, but the pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. Most people would have written it off as bad luck. But I'd grown up in the restaurant business, watching my mother work twice as hard as any man to be taken seriously in the kitchen. I knew the difference between random mishaps and orchestrated problems, so I started documenting everything. Every canceled order, every service interruption, every health inspection that somehow always happened during our busiest hours. I installed security cameras that caught interesting late-night visitors tampering with our equipment. I saved every email, recorded every phone call. With Washington being a two-party consent state, I made sure to mention calls were being recorded for quality assurance. Most importantly, I had proof of who was really behind that anonymous tip to the health department. The shutdown is temporary, I said, watching him closely. We'll be open again soon. He laughed, the sound echoing in the empty dining room. With what money? Your savings are gone from fighting the violations. Your credit cards are maxed out. Your little experiment in running a business is over. Face it, niece, you're finished. Just like I told your father you would be when he left you the restaurant instead of me. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. Actually, Uncle, I think things are about to turn around. Right on cue, the front door opened. Uncle David turned, probably expecting another health inspector or debt collector. Instead, he found himself face to face with Linda Martinez from the Seattle Restaurant Association, accompanied by 2 police officers and a very serious-looking woman in a business suit. David Chen, the suited woman asked, though she clearly knew who he was. I'm Rebecca Wong from the Department of Health and Safety. We need to discuss some concerning evidence about falsified health code violations and tampering with food service establishments. Uncle David's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Michelle, what is this? I opened my laptop, pulling up carefully organized folders of evidence. This is every late-night visit you and your friends made to my restaurant, caught on security cameras. Every suspicious equipment failure, traced back to deliberate tampering. Every canceled supplier order that was mysteriously lost after calls from your phone number. The police officers moved closer as I continued. But the really interesting part is the health code violations. You see, I had my own independent inspector document everything before and after your anonymous tip. The timestamps on the photos the health department received, they show evidence being planted after hours, and the security footage shows exactly who did the planting. Linda Martinez stepped forward. The Restaurant Association takes accusations of sabotage very seriously, Mr. Chen, especially when it appears to be motivated by gender discrimination and family rivalry. Uncle David's confidence crumbled. You can't prove anything. This is family business, private matters. Actually, Rebecca Wong interrupted, we have signed statements from 3 of your former employees detailing how you orchestrated this scheme. They were quite eager to talk once they learned they could be held liable for participating in health code violations. I watched my uncle's face as he realized just how thoroughly I documented everything. All those years of dismissing me as just a naive girl who got lucky with Daddy's restaurant had led him to underestimate me completely. The health department is officially reversing the shutdown order, Rebecca continued. Our investigation shows clear evidence of fraudulent complaints and deliberately planted violations. Furthermore, we'll be investigating your own restaurants for actual health code compliance. Uncle David turned to me, his face a mix of rage and disbelief. You planned this? Your own uncle? No, Uncle David. You planned this. I just made sure to document everything. I pulled out another folder, including these emails where you bragged to your friends about how you were going to force me to sell by showing everyone women can't handle the pressure of running a real restaurant. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The health department not only cleared Golden Dragon, but also launched a full investigation into Uncle David's restaurant empire. Turns out he'd been cutting corners on safety regulations for years, confident that his connections would protect him. The local restaurant community rallied around me. Other female restaurateurs shared their own stories of dealing with David's attempts at intimidation and sabotage over the years. 3 of his former managers came forward with evidence of systematic health code violations at his own establishments. I always knew David was a bully, Linda told me later, but we never had enough proof to act. You did what none of us managed to do. You documented everything and built an airtight case. The newspaper coverage was particularly satisfying. Family Restaurant Feud Exposes Pattern of Harassment read one headline. Local restaurant owner turns tables on uncle's sabotage attempt, read another. Each article highlighted not just Uncle David's schemes, but also my restaurant's reputation for excellence and innovation. Golden Dragon reopened to record crowds. Our regulars came back in full force, joined by new customers who'd read about the situation and wanted to show support. The Yelp reviews that had mysteriously tanked our rating were removed after we proved they were part of a coordinated attack. Uncle David's empire, meanwhile, began to crumble. The health department found multiple violations at his restaurants. Suppliers started backing away from contracts. His industry connections, seeing which way the wind was blowing, suddenly couldn't take his calls. Within 6 months, he was forced to sell 2 of his restaurants at a fraction of their value. His reputation in the Seattle restaurant scene was ruined. The last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona to work as a restaurant consultant. Though who would take advice from him now was anybody's guess. 1 year later, I sat in my office, the same one Uncle David had once told me I didn't deserve, reviewing plans for our second location. Golden Dragon had not only recovered, but thrived. Our innovative fusion menu and commitment to quality had earned us features in several national food magazines. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Amy, Uncle David's daughter. Dad's trying to get back into the Seattle restaurant scene. He's telling everyone he's learned his lesson. I smiled, thinking about the folders of evidence still secured in my files. Has he really? I texted back. No, she replied. But at least now, everyone knows to keep records when dealing with him. The lesson hadn't been lost on the rest of the family either. At the last family gathering, my Aunt Susan, David's sister, pulled me aside. I always told David his old school attitudes would bite him someday, she said. I just never expected it would be you who finally proved him wrong. Your father would be so proud. I thought about my dad, who'd left me the restaurant despite pressure from his brothers to keep it in the male line. He'd always told me success in this business came down to 3 things: quality food, careful attention to detail, and keeping good records. Last week, I was asked to speak at a Women in Restaurants conference about protecting yourself from industry harassment and sabotage. As I shared my story of documenting everything and building an airtight case, I spotted a familiar face in the back row, Uncle David's wife, taking notes. I made sure to thank him in my speech. After all, he'd taught me the most valuable lesson of my career. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even. It's about keeping better records. 2 years after Uncle David's failed attempt to steal my restaurant, Golden Dragon has expanded to 3 locations. Our original restaurant has become a destination for food tourists, partly because of our innovative menu, but also because of the story of how we survived a family betrayal through careful documentation. Sometimes I think about how differently things could have turned out if I hadn't been prepared, if I hadn't learned to protect myself in an industry that often dismisses women as too emotional or not tough enough to succeed. The health department still uses my case as an example in their training materials: how to spot coordinated attempts at sabotage and the importance of maintaining detailed records. Uncle David's schemes had unintentionally created a blueprint for protecting small restaurant owners from similar attacks. Last month, I received an email from Uncle David, the first contact since his downfall. Inside was an awkward attempt at an apology, probably written by his lawyer, admitting that his traditional views had clouded his judgment. I saved the email in my records, right next to the security footage of him tampering with my kitchen equipment. Some lessons take a long time to learn, but if Uncle David taught me anything, it's that the quiet ones aren't always the weak ones. Sometimes they're just better at keeping receipts.